August 30, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa vanished, sparking America's greatest criminal mystery. We meticulously reconstruct his final moments, revealing the cold truth and the lives forever altered. On the afternoon of July 30, 1975, the bright summer sun beat down on the asphalt parking lot of the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, a quiet, upscale suburb just north of Detroit, Michigan. Jimmy Hoffa, the 62-year-old former president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, paced back and forth near his maroon Pontiac Grand Prix, his agitation growing more apparent with each passing minute. He was a man accustomed to absolute punctuality and complete control, yet the associates he was scheduled to meet were already nearly an hour late for their 2 o'clock appointment. At approximately 2:15 p.m., Hoffa walked into the restaurant, used a public payphone to call his wife, Josephine, and expressed his deep frustration, stating that he had been stood up and would wait just a few more minutes before returning home. He then walked back outside into the shimmering heat, where a few casual witnesses noted his presence, including a real estate agent who saw him talking to several individuals inside a luxury sedan. By 3:30 p.m., the turnout was completely empty, save for Hoffa's unlocked Pontiac, which remained parked in the exact same spot as the restaurant afternoon transitioned into evening. The powerful labor leader, who had once held the entire American transportation industry in the palm of his hand, had vanished into thin air without leaving a struggle, a note, or a single drop of blood on the pavement. For decades, that quiet Michigan parking lot would remain ground zero for the most intensive, frustrating missing persons investigation in federal law enforcement history. It was the moment a living legend became a ghost, launching a mystery that would capture the dark imagination of the American public for generations to come. To understand the forces that collided in that suburban parking lot, one must look backward to the grim, unforgiving realities of the Great Depression, where James Riddle Hoffa forged his relentless path to power. Born in Brazil, Indiana, in 1913, Hoffa grew up in a household defined by economic hardship, losing his coal miner father at an early age before his family migrated to the industrial heart of Detroit. By the age of 16, Hoffa was working grueling shifts as a grocery warehouse laborer, enduring abusive management, substandard wages, and dangerous working conditions that ignited a fierce, lifelong labor activism within his chest. Gifted with an extraordinary physical stamina, a sharp, intuitive intelligence, and a completely fearless disposition, he quickly organized his fellow workers into a cohesive strike force, shutting down shipments until ownership capitulated. His raw talent for grassroots organization caught the attention of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a burgeoning union representing the truck drivers who formed the very circulatory system of American commerce. Hoffa rose through the union ranks with terrifying speed, proving himself to be an unyielding, aggressive negotiator who was entirely willing to use physical force, street brawls, and labor strikes to bend corporate bosses to his will. He viewed the labor movement as a literal war, one where the working man needed a tough, uncompromising champion who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty in the pursuit of fair wages. To the average truck driver, Hoffa became an authentic folk hero, a man who had emerged from the dust of the warehouse floor to give the working class a voice that could shake the foundations of corporate America. By the mid-1950s, Jimmy Hoffa had transformed the International Brotherhood of Teamsters from a collection of scattered local chapters into the largest, most formidable labor union in the entire Western world. In 1957, he officially assumed the general presidency of the union, overseeing more than 1.5 million members whose collective labor could effectively bring the entire United States economy to a grinding halt if they chose to walk off the job. Hoffa understood that true power lay in absolute centralization, a philosophy that culminated in the historic 1964 National Master Freight Agreement, which unified over 400,000 over-the-road truck drivers under a single, comprehensive contract. This landmark achievement guaranteed unprecedented healthcare benefits, safe working hours, and stable pensions for families who had previously been entirely at the mercy of cutthroat shipping corporations. Hoffa's influence extended far beyond the highway system, reaching deep into national politics, manufacturing industries, and major financial institutions, making him one of the most powerful men in the country, completely independent of elected office. He traveled the nation constantly, addressing packed arenas of fiercely loyal Union members who greeted him with roaring standing ovations, viewing him as a savior who had lifted them into the middle class. Yet, as his legitimate empire grew to colossal proportions, the methods Hoffa utilized to maintain his ironclad grip on power began to draw the deep concern of federal investigators. The immense financial resources generated by the Union's rapid expansion had caught the attention of a hidden, shadow empire that operated in the dark corners of the American underworld. The true engine of Jimmy Hoffa's immense power, and ultimately the source of his profound undoing, was the creation of the Teamsters Central States Southeast and Southwest Areas Pension Fund. Established to secure the retirement years of hundreds of thousands of truck drivers, this financial entity accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars in cash reserves through steady, mandatory employer contributions. Hoffa retained personal, direct control over the distribution of these vast funds, viewing the pension reserve not as a static bank account, but as a multi-million-dollar lending institution that could be utilized to build strategic alliances. During the 1950s and 1960s, traditional commercial banks routinely refused to finance high-risk, speculative real estate ventures, particularly the ambitious construction of luxury casino hotels in the desert city of Las Vegas, Nevada. Hoffa stepped into this financial vacuum, authorized dozens of multi-million-dollar loans from the Drivers' Pension Fund to finance the creation of legendary resorts like the Stardust, the Dunes, the Desert Inn, and the Circus. These massive financial transactions were often approved with minimal oversight, secured by questionable collateral, and facilitated by intermediaries who represented the nation's most powerful organized crime families. In return for this unprecedented access to ready capital, the underworld provided Hoffa with an unyielding muscle on the streets, helping him crush internal Union dissent, manipulate local elections, and enforce labor compliance through intimidation. The Central States Pension Fund had essentially become an open vault for America's premier mob bosses, tying the financial destiny of the nation's largest union directly to the fortunes of the criminal underworld. The dark symbiotic relationship between Jimmy Hoffa and organized crime was not an accidental development, but a cold, calculated arrangement that permeated every tier of the Teamsters executive structure. Mob figures from the powerful families of Chicago, Detroit, New York, and New Jersey quickly realized that controlling a local Teamsters chapter gave them the unilateral power to extort businesses through the threat of wildcat strikes. Hoffa, conversely, utilized the underworld's terrifying reputation to pacify rival unions, silence whistleblowers, and eliminate any internal challengers who threatened to disrupt his centralized control of the national organization. High-ranking mob associates were systematically placed into lucrative positions as union business agents, local presidents, and international trustees, granting them legitimate salaries, legal coverage, and immense community influence. Key underworld figures, such as Anthony "Tony" Jack Giacalone of the Detroit Partnership and Anthony "Tony" Provenzano, a powerful captain in New York's Genovese family who also ruled Teamsters Local 560 in New Jersey, became Hoffa's closest operational confidants. Millions of dollars in untraceable cash, skimmed directly from the counting rooms of the Las Vegas casinos built with union loans, made its way back east in leather suitcases, divided up among mob bosses and corrupt union officials. To the outside observer, the boundary line between the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and the National Mafia Syndicate had been completely erased, creating an empire of unprecedented wealth and power. Yet, this flagrant disregard for federal law eventually triggered a massive, retaliatory response from the highest levels of the United States government, launching a historic legal war that would push Hoffa to the absolute brink. The golden era of Jimmy Hoffa's absolute legal immunity came to a crashing halt in the late 1950s with the rise of the Senate McClellan Committee, which was formed to investigate labor racketeering and union corruption. The committee's brilliant chief counsel was a relentless, idealistic young lawyer named Robert F. Kennedy, who viewed Hoffa as a direct, existential threat to the democratic institutions of the United States. The televised hearings quickly transformed into a bitter, deeply personal duel between the two men, with Kennedy using the platform to expose Hoffa's extensive financial ties to prominent underworld executioners. Hoffa refused to be intimidated, matching Kennedy's aggressive questioning with open contempt, mocking smiles, and evasive, combative answers that infuriated the young investigator. The political stakes escalated dramatically in 1961 when Robert F. Kennedy was appointed Attorney General of the United States by his brother, President John F. Kennedy, granting him the full power of the Department of Justice. Kennedy immediately established a dedicated, highly specialized federal task force within the government, known colloquially across the nation as the Get Hoffa Squad, composed of elite IRS agents, FBI investigators, and federal prosecutors. This elite unit focused exclusively on monitoring Hoffa's daily movements, auditing his complex personal taxes, wiretapping his phone lines, and grand jury questioning his inner circle. Kennedy publicly declared that no single citizen could be allowed to stand above the law, while Hoffa consistently countercharged that the entire federal investigation was nothing more than a politically motivated vendetta designed to destroy the American labor movement. The relentless, multi-year pressure from Robert F. Kennedy's dedicated federal task force finally broke through Jimmy Hoffa's formidable legal defenses in 1964, resulting in two devastating criminal trials. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, Hoffa was officially convicted of jury tampering after federal agents discovered he had utilized union funds to bribe members of a grand jury during a previous conspiracy trial. Just months later, in Chicago, Illinois, he was hit with a secondary conviction for mail fraud and conspiracy, after prosecutors proved he had systematically diverted millions from the Central States Pension Fund into fraudulent real estate schemes. After exhaustively pursuing every possible legal appeal all the way to the United States Supreme Court, Hoffa's options finally ran out on March 7, 1967, when he walked through the gates of the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. The man who had ruled an empire was stripped of his custom-tailored suits, dressed in standard prison denim, and assigned a small concrete cell, beginning an 8-year sentence for his crimes. Yet, even from behind the towering brick walls of the penitentiary, Hoffa refused to fully relinquish his tight grip on the leadership of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. He retained his official title as General President, operating through a carefully chosen surrogate named Frank Fitzsimmons, a loyal Detroit Union official whom Hoffa mistakenly believed would act as a passive placeholder until his release. Hoffa spent his days in the prison yard, exercising vigorously to maintain his physical health and planning his grand return to public life, entirely unaware that the world outside was moving on without him. By 1971, Jimmy Hoffa had served nearly 5 grueling years of his federal sentence, and his intense desire to escape confinement led him to pursue a path of high-level political maneuvering. His allies lobbied the administration of President Richard Nixon, emphasizing that Hoffa still commanded the fierce, enduring loyalty of millions of working-class voters who were critical to the upcoming presidential election. On December 23, 1971, President Nixon officially commuted Hoffa's remaining prison sentence, allowing him to walk out of Lewisburg a free man just in time for the Christmas holidays. However, the executive clemency carried a devastating, hidden sting that had been quietly engineered behind the scenes by his political enemies and former allies alike. A specific, mandatory condition was inserted into the commutation document, officially barring Hoffa from participating in any direct or indirect management of labor union activities until March 1980. This restrictive clause was a crippling blow to Hoffa, effectively cutting him off from the only life he had ever known and rendering him a powerless spectator in his own empire. Hoffa immediately suspected that his hand-picked surrogate, Frank Fitzsimmons, had actively conspired with White House officials to insert the restriction to secure his own permanent position at the top of the Union. Furious and deeply humiliated, Hoffa publicly signed the release papers under protest, immediately directing his expensive legal team to challenge the constitutionality of the restriction in federal courts, determined to shatter the legal chains that bound him. Upon his return to civilian life, Jimmy Hoffa completely ignored the advice of his family and friends, launching a frantic, aggressive public campaign to reclaim the general presidency of the Teamsters. He viewed Frank Fitzsimmons not as a legitimate successor, but as a weak, disloyal usurper who was systematically squandering the union's immense power and allowing localized chapters to break away from centralized control. Fitzsimmons had grown incredibly popular among the union's executive board and the regional mob bosses, primarily because he was far more cooperative than the demanding, iron-willed Hoffa had ever been. Unfazed by his growing isolation, Hoffa traveled across the country, appearing on local television programs, giving fiery interviews to major newspapers, and addressing grassroots union locals. He explicitly promised the rank-and-file truck drivers that once he defeated the Nixon restriction in court, he would initiate a massive audit to root out corruption and restore fiscal discipline to the organization. He filed a sweeping lawsuit against the Department of Justice, claiming the union ban was an illegal, unconstitutional violation of his personal freedom of speech and association. His public rhetoric grew increasingly reckless as the months advanced, openly threatening to expose the illicit financial arrangements that Fitzsimmons had made with prominent figures in the underworld. Hoffa mistakenly believed that his status as a living legend among the working class made him completely untouchable, failing to realize that his loud, unguided crusade was rapidly transforming him into a dangerous liability for his former criminal associates. The fundamental miscalculation that Jimmy Hoffa made during his frantic bid to regain control of the Teamsters was his complete failure to recognize that the criminal underworld's priorities had fundamentally changed. During his 5-year absence in prison, the top leaders of the national Mafia syndicate had found a perfect, highly lucrative arrangement with Frank Fitzsimmons at the helm of the union. Fitzsimmons allowed the Central States Pension Fund loans to flow smoothly into organized crime projects without demanding the absolute obedience, personal loyalty, and erratic behavior that characterized Hoffa's rule. The Commission of Mob Bosses realized that if Hoffa successfully returned to power, his highly publicized legal battles, intense FBI scrutiny, and volatile temperament would disrupt their multi-million-dollar operations. Furthermore, Hoffa's explicit threats to clean up the union and expose illicit fund diversions were viewed by the underworld as a direct, treasonous threat to their survival. Senior mob figures, including Russell Bufalino of Pennsylvania and the leadership of the Detroit Partnership, sent multiple, quiet warnings to Hoffa through trusted intermediaries, advising him to take his generous union retirement pension and retire quietly to his lake house. Hoffa refused every single warning, his immense ego and deep desire for personal revenge blinding him to the stark reality that he was no longer an asset to the syndicate, but an existential threat. The very same shadow executioners who had once acted as his street-level muscle had now reached a collective, definitive consensus. The former union boss had become entirely unmanageable, and he had to be permanently removed from the equation. In the volatile weeks leading up to July 1975, Jimmy Hoffa believed he had finally secured a critical diplomatic breakthrough that would resolve his ongoing disputes with his opponents in the underworld. A high-level meeting was supposedly arranged to facilitate a personal reconciliation between Hoffa and Anthony "Tony Pro" Provenzano, the powerful New Jersey capo with whom Hoffa had developed a bitter, violent hatred while they were both serving time inside Lewisburg prison. The primary mediator who allegedly set up this delicate encounter was Anthony "Tony Jack" Giacalone, a high-ranking, street-smart captain in the Detroit Mafia who had maintained a close relationship with Hoffa for decades. The chosen location for this face-to-face summit was the Machus Red Fox restaurant, a quiet, upscale establishment that was deliberately selected because it was a public, respectable venue where all parties would theoretically feel entirely safe from violence. Hoffa viewed this meeting as an essential opportunity to win back the support of the East Coast mob families, believing that if he could patch up his relationship with Provenzano, the path to the Union presidency would open up. In reality, the entire arrangement was a carefully engineered, deceptive trap designed to lure the hyper-cautious labor leader away from his personal security detail and into an isolated, completely defenseless position. On the morning of July 30th, Hoffa dressed in a casual knit shirt, said goodbye to his wife, and drove toward Bloomfield Township with a sense of optimism, completely unaware that the associates he expected to meet had already established ironclad, verifiable alibis for that exact afternoon. The chronological timeline of July 30, 1975, reveals a series of perfectly ordinary moments that suddenly culminated in an unprecedented historical mystery. Jimmy Hoffa left his residence in Lake Orion at approximately 1:00 p.m., stopping briefly at the office of a close friend before arriving at the Machus Red Fox restaurant ahead of his scheduled 2:00 appointment. When Anthony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano failed to appear, Hoffa's signature impatience quickly boiled over into an intense, public anger. After waiting in the lobby for several minutes, he walked to a nearby public payphone and placed a call to his wife, telling her he would wait until 2:30 p.m. before returning home to grill steaks for dinner. A few minutes after 2:15 p.m., Hoffa was seen by a witness walking out to the parking lot, where a sleek, late-model luxury car pulled up alongside him. Investigators believe that Hoffa recognized someone inside the vehicle, an individual he trusted implicitly, which convinced him to enter the car voluntarily without a visible struggle. By the time his close associates realized he had failed to return home that evening, a profound, chilling silence had already settled over his whereabouts. Josephine Hoffa, deeply alarmed by her husband's unprecedented failure to call or return, contacted family members, who immediately alerted the local police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation early the next morning. When detectives arrived at the restaurant parking lot, they found Hoffa's maroon Pontiac completely undisturbed, unlocked, and containing his personal medication, proving that his departure had been sudden, unexpected, and entirely permanent. The sudden disappearance of the nation's most prominent labor leader immediately triggered the Hoffa's investigation, which quickly evolved into one of the largest, most expensive federal undertakings in FBI history. Hundreds of elite special agents were deployed across the country, conducting thousands of interviews, executing federal search warrants, and wiretapping the communications of known organized crime figures. Investigators focused heavily on the immediate alibis of the men Hoffa had traveled to meet that afternoon. Anthony Giacalone was quickly found to have spent the entire afternoon at a luxury health club in Detroit, casually chatting with attendants and ensuring his presence was documented, while Tony Provenzano was confirmed to have been playing cards at a Union Hall in Hoboken, New Jersey. The discovery of these flawless, highly synchronized alibis only solidified the FBI's theory that the hit had been meticulously planned weeks in advance by a centralized criminal conspiracy. Detectives carefully combed through Hoffa's abandoned Pontiac, dusting the exterior metal for latent fingerprints and vacuuming the interior carpet fibers for any trace of biological evidence, but the search yielded no immediate clues. A massive media circus descended upon Bloomfield Township, with television news crews from across the globe broadcasting live from the restaurant parking lot, transforming the local suburb into an active true crime arena. Despite the immense public pressure and the mobilization of massive federal resources, investigators found themselves hitting a solid wall of absolute silence, as the underworld closed ranks to protect its secrets. The first significant break in the frustratingly silent case emerged when FBI agents focused their attention on a 1975 Maroon Mercury Marquis Brougham luxury sedan that had been utilized by Charles "Chucky" O'Brien on the day of the disappearance. O'Brien was Hoffa's foster son, a young man who had been raised inside the Hoffa household since childhood and who worked closely as a driver and courier for the Union. On July 30, O'Brien had borrowed the luxury vehicle from Joey Giacalone, the son of mob captain Anthony Giacalone, under the pretext of delivering a fresh salmon to a local Union official's residence. A highly sensitive police tracking dog, introduced to the interior of the Mercury weeks later, reacted strongly to Hoffa's scent on the rear passenger seat, indicating that the missing labor leader had indeed been inside the car. Decades later, in 2001, advanced forensic scientists utilized modern DNA technology to analyze a single, microscopic hair follicle that had been recovered from the vehicle's rear cushion during the initial 1975 investigation. The genetic testing confirmed that the hair was a definitive biological match to Jimmy Hoffa, providing the very first piece of hard, forensic proof linking the vehicle directly to his disappearance. Chucky O'Brien consistently denied any personal involvement in the crime until his death, claiming he had absolutely no knowledge of how his foster father's hair had entered the vehicle. Investigators strongly suspect that the killers utilized O'Brien's known presence in the vehicle to lower Hoffa's defenses, convincing him to step into the car because he recognized his own foster son behind the wheel. The official FBI Hoffa's memorandum, a comprehensive internal document compiled by federal investigators, outlines a definitive, chilling narrative of how the execution was likely carried out by a specialized team of cross-regional mob figures. Federal prosecutors believe that after Hoffa entered the Maroon Mercury marquee, he was quickly subdued and driven to a nearby, pre-selected safe house in the Detroit suburbs before he could realize the depth of the deception. Among the prime suspects identified by the Bureau was Salvatore "Sally Bugs" Briguglio, a brutal, highly feared enforcer for Tony Provenzano's New Jersey operation who matched the physical descriptions of the man seen near the restaurant. Investigators theorize that a high-ranking team of local hitmen, acting under the direct authorization of the Detroit and National Mafia Commission, carried out the final execution to prevent Hoffa from disrupting their lucrative union arrangements. The leading theory suggests that Hoffa was shot twice in the back of the head immediately upon entering the safe house, a swift, professional assassination designed to minimize mess and prevent any chance of escape. The ultimate disposal of the body remains the most elusive element of the case, with investigators strongly believing that the remains were immediately destroyed in a high-heat commercial incinerator or a local sanitation facility. This cold, professional efficiency ensured that no physical corpus delicti would ever be recovered to form the basis of a murder prosecution in a court of law. The conspiracy had functioned with perfect discipline, leaving federal agents to chase rumors and ghostly leads across the industrial landscape of the American Midwest. In 2004, the publishing of the true crime book, I Heard You Paint Houses introduced a dramatic, highly publicized confession from Frank, the Irishman, Sheeran, a high-ranking Teamsters official and known mob enforcer. Sheeran claimed that he had been chosen by Russell Bufalino to personally execute Hoffa, stating that he had lured his close friend to an empty house in northwest Detroit and shot him twice behind the ear. This sensational narrative gained massive global popularity, eventually serving as the direct foundation for major Hollywood films and cementing itself in the modern public consciousness as the definitive solution. However, professional historians, veteran FBI agents, and forensic experts have systematically discredited Sheeran's claims, viewing his late-life confession as a highly lucrative fabrication designed to sell books. Forensic specialists conducted an intensive investigation of the Detroit residence identified by Sheeran, ripping up the floorboards to test for biological material using modern chemical agents. While faint traces of blood were initially discovered in the hallway, subsequent DNA laboratory analysis definitively proved that the blood did not belong to Jimmy Hoffa, completely undermining the physical basis of his story. Furthermore, cellular and historical records indicate that Sheeran was likely not even present in the Detroit area on the afternoon of the disappearance, placing him miles away from the crime scene. The Irishman's confession was ultimately exposed as a clever exercise in myth-making, proving how easily a dramatic, self-serving fictional narrative can overshadow the dry, frustrating realities of an open federal investigation. The total absence of Jimmy Hoffa's physical remains over the decades created a massive vacuum that was quickly filled by increasingly bizarre urban legends, folklore, and wild conspiracy theories. The most pervasive myth claimed that Hoffa's body had been placed inside a steel drum, driven across state lines, and buried beneath the concrete of Section 107 of the Giant Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. This legendary rumor became so deeply embedded in American pop culture that the FBI eventually addressed it, and decades later, when the stadium was demolished in 2010, federal agents monitored the excavation, finding absolutely no biological evidence. Other widely publicized theories suggested that his body had been run through a commercial car compressor in Detroit, shipped overseas as scrap metal, or buried on a remote horse farm in Michigan. Over the years, acting on tips from prison informants and dying mobsters, the FBI has authorized numerous high-profile field digs, deploying heavy excavators, ground-penetrating radar, and forensic anthropologists to tear up properties across the Midwest. In 2006, a massive search swarmed a horse farm in Milford, Michigan. In 2013, a concrete slab in Roseville was systematically drilled, and in 2022, a former landfill beneath the Pulaski Skyway in New Jersey was extensively excavated. Every single search yielded the exact same frustrating result: empty soil, old construction debris, and absolutely no trace of the missing Teamster leader. These highly publicized, futile operations served as a stark reminder of the underworld's total victory over federal forensics, demonstrating that a secret well-kept can withstand the most advanced technology of the modern age. On July 30, 1982, exactly 7 years to the day after he walked out of the Machus Red Fox restaurant, James Riddle Hoffa was officially declared legally dead in absentia by a Michigan probate court. The legal declaration allowed his family to finally settle his estate, but it did absolutely nothing to close the active, ongoing files maintained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Today, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa remains an open, unresolved homicide investigation, a timeless monument to an era when organized crime possessed the terrifying capability to erase the most powerful figures in the nation without facing judicial consequences. The case stands as a sobering historical reminder of the high-stakes, violent intersection between American labor, corporate finance, and the criminal syndicates that operated in the shadows of the 20th century. Hoffa's legacy is a complex, deeply divided one. He was an authentic savior to the working-class truck drivers he lifted out of poverty, yet his willingness to invite the Mafia into his house ultimately sealed his tragic fate. The truth of his final moments remains locked away in the graves of the silent executioners who carried out the command, men who took their secrets with them into the dark, leaving behind a permanent void in the historical record. As the years continue to advance and the 1970s recede further into the distant past, the image of that empty, sun-baked Michigan parking lot endures as a powerful symbol of a mystery that will likely never be fully solved, a ghost story that will haunt the annals of American crime forever. Before you go, here's the thing. Every week we investigate another mystery the world could never solve. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And here's the most important part. The next case we investigate could be yours. Tell us in the comments which unsolved mystery, disappearance, or disaster we should cover next. We read every suggestion, and the stories that stay with you are the ones we bring to life.